Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast where innovation isn't just an ideal, it's a way of life. I'm your host and creator of the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die newsletter, Danny Nathan. Hello, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. This week I have Steve Iglesias with me. Steve, welcome. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to get into the conversation.
Awesome. So am I. Let's dive right in. To kick us off, Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how innovation became part of your day-to-day.
Back in 2009, I got into education. My best friend and I owned a baseball academy, and like 3 weeks before school starts, he gets the job at the Royal Academy Prep in Miami, Florida. Like 3 days before school starts, he calls me. He's like, "Hey, they're looking for a golf coach. Why don't you come coach golf and coach baseball with me?" Then, got into the classroom, taught for 4 years, then became an administrator, kind of the grunt work, dean of discipline, head of security, head of operations. And right around 2018, I was really bored. I wanted to get out of education. I was looking for something else. I've always been a big reader, reading books on coaching and leadership and success in general. And I'm reading a book by Peter Diamandis called Bold. And it's talking about the future. It's talking about aerial taxing. It's talking about biomedical engineering, longevity, AI, the future. I'm like, man, kids really need to learn about this stuff. And I said, you know what, before I leave, let me try and kind of make my mark, put my stamp in this space. If you ask anybody in the education space what technology is, the only thing they know how to tell you is robotics. So I went to my first robotics competition. I came back and I was like, man, this is really cool. But instead of just playing games, what if we can teach kids how to use technology to actually solve a real world problem?
Yes.
And that kind of became the crux around every program that we started introducing into the school. There was a stat at the time that had just come out by Dell. That was kind of shocking. Basically stated that over 80% of the jobs these kids are going to have in the next 10 years, they don't even exist today. We're not doing a good enough job to inspire these kids. Simultaneously, there was a podcast by Peter and Palmer Luckey that I was listening to. Palmer Luckey's the guy that invented the Oculus Quest. He's on this podcast with Peter, and they're talking about the future and kids and education. Palmer stops and looks at him and is like, "Hey, Peter, we always tell our kids they got to follow their passions and follow their dreams. But what if today they have really crappy passions?" And the reality is, about a year ago, 60 Minutes did a study of kids ages 14 and under in this country, and over 70% of them want to be TikTokers and YouTubers.
Oh, man, that's so disheartening.
They took that same study in China, and they want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be scientists. They want to be technologists. Folks in society, they're actually building something productive. And I think, we need to really scale that. We need to bring that back here, create that excitement back, like, in the 1960s and in the Cold War era, the space race era. Every kid in this country wanted to be an astronaut, wanted to be a scientist, a technologist. We got to kind of bring that back. I would really just take a look at what's happening out in the real world and kind of bring it to their level in the middle school and high school level to inspire them. So I became the director of innovation and technology, and just made a kind of a career move within the same network of schools. And now I'm the chief innovation officer at Matter Brickle, and taking on a new innovative project within the future of education.
Awesome. That sounds so interesting. I want to circle back to something that you said a moment ago, Steve. You mentioned that in 2018, you had this sort of, moment of, do I move on or do I stick around? And being inspired to show kids that there is sort of more out there and more potential. How did you go about bringing that back to the other administrators in the school and sort of selling them on the idea of what you had envisioned that piqued your interest and kept you sort of in the education spaces as opposed to running off and finding something else?
That was probably one of the easiest things, and some folks will say it's super difficult. And the reason I say that is because in the world of charter schools, we have a lot more freedom and a lot less bureaucracy. And I was blessed with a principal and a mentor to me that kind of gave me the leeway and freedom, and forecasted the vision of education heading this way early on.
Hmm.
So we didn't start with anything crazy. We started an after school club where we would just get kids motivated to think about how they can use technology to solve a real world problem. We named that club Innovate, and that over the years started to grow. One of the first projects we worked on in 2018 as the extracurricular club was there was a school shooting near home, 40 minutes away at Parkland. Um, it was one of the kind of, I think, the inflection points in school safety and
Hmm.
attacking this problem. And being 40 minutes, it was very impactful for our students. They knew some folks, so some of the students that were in that, and we wanted to kind of capture that moment and use it for the positive and for the good. So the kids, working with the kids, taking them through the design process, taking them, to define the exact problem and how we can find technology to solve that problem. They created a autonomous code red lockdown system where through the cloud and a push of a button on a phone, we could tint the windows, lock the doors, and turns off the lights automatically.
Wow.
Uh,
And this got implemented across the school?
no, so I mean, at first this was just a proof of concept.
Okay.
And so this kind of became the cornerstone of our lab. And so the more folks that we started bringing through that saw that our kids were doing this, they were like,
Uh-huh.
man, this started to create momentum. In there,
Yeah.
they developed, shortly after, they developed a vape detector, a proof of concept of basically 3D printed box with a bunch of sensors in there that would identify vape. Vaping is a huge issue for that demographic. And then they created a proof of concept of that. And then, throughout the years, it went from being a club to actually, okay, how do we put this into the daytime? Now that it's not just 1 hour after school. How do we start creating courses and pathways so that kids are actually taking these as their electives? That's when it started to get a little bit more difficult, right? Because
Okay.
right now our education system is geared towards one thing, and that's put kids into college. And so that's the only way kind of schools are measured on getting kids into college and getting kids passing standardized tests. I think COVID was an inflection point for education as far as innovation. I
Hmm.
mean, you had tons of schools going online, going on Zoom. I still remember the day our management company called us and told us, hey, there's this company called Zoom that we're going to partner with to have virtual courses until this COVID thing is over. It's going to be temporary. I mean, we're still doing it today, right?
So how did that end up coming to life in the curriculum? Like, I understand the difficulties, especially in terms of aligning to, college entrance KPIs and standardized testing. How did you overcome those challenges, and what did that sort of innovation path start to look like as part of the curriculum for the kids?
One of the biggest things I see in education today is there's two types of students. There's the students that are considered for college, and then there's kind of like everybody else. And everybody
Okay.
else falls into this vocational CTE category and bucket. And so anything that doesn't fit in this category automatically drops in this category, which is almost considered less than right now.
Hmm.
And so in technology specifically, the kids that want to go into AI, the kids that want to go into cybersecurity, who are the kids that are attracted to this? The really, really smart kids that are on the AP tracks trying to get into the top universities across the country, MIT, Harvard,
Right.
Stanford, Yale, right? They currently don't have time in their schedule to take these sorts of AP cybersecurity courses because they're one of the most successful or one of the most proven ways to get into these top schools is you got to pack rigor, you got to pack AP, and you got to have maximum scores on these tests. So they don't have a lot of room in their or wiggle room in their schedules to take these courses. So one of the things we had to do was kind of how do we give more weight, right, to these
Hmm.
to these programs and pathways. And at first you think typically we'll do an enrollment. How can we give them college credit? That's kind of equivalent to an AP.
Yeah.
Um, and then what are the tangible things that they can take home with them? What are the industry certifications that, when they finish this pathway, when they finish the cybersecurity pathway, when they finish the AI pathway, when they finish computer science or engineering or robotics, whatever pathway they choose, what are the tangible things that I'm taking with me that I, when I graduate high school, I actually have the opportunity to actually sit down and think, do I go to college or do I enter the workforce?
Right.
And it's a valid thing because you know in some of these industries you can leave high school, go straight into the field making 80, 90, $100,000 a year at an entry level position with these industry certifications. And
Right.
now what I think is happening is there's a renewal around in education around workforce readiness, workforce
Hmm.
development. And so states are starting to level the playing field and try to give the same amount of importance to the CTE type courses and certifications as AP. Once they start to do that and balance it out and give the same accountability measures to schools, I think we'll see scalability across the board in this.
Steve, you've talked about how to get the college track kids interested and encouraging them to sort of fit this into their schedule. Have you seen an increase in the other group also taking an interest in this? And how much of an impact have you seen in terms of, what you're describing, workforce readiness for the kids that may not be as highly encouraged to pursue a college degree or may not be interested?
That's probably the toughest part. Is you know there's still a bunch of students, parents. Those are the ones that need to get educated the most because everybody's mindset still is you need to get the piece of paper, you need to get the degree. So changing that mindset that hey, we don't all need to go to college anymore. You
Hmm.
know the I think the country's starting to realize that for certain degrees the ROI is not there to come out of with $150,000 in student loans to become a teacher, like
Right.
it doesn't make sense.
Right.
It's been so ingrained for the last 40, 50 years. That's been the ticket to success.
Yeah.
So how do we start breaking that stigma? And I think, right now we're at that point where families are starting to question it.
Interesting. Steve, I want to circle back to the stat that you threw out. You said 70% of kids under 14 in the US have a life ambition of becoming a TikTok or a YouTube star. In the context of your role as an innovator in the education space, um, how do you think that the clubs and the courses that you're putting together are designed to help combat that and encourage students to look beyond, TikTok, YouTube?
There's no perfect answer for that, but I think
No,
there's
of
two things
course.
that we should be doing, that schools should be doing in general. Number one is, right now there's a big problem. Kids are not going to school. Chronic absenteeism it's vernacular in education, and I think the reason for that is because schools aren't providing relevance, and I think the relevance of okay, this is actually helpful in preparing me for my future
Right.
is the school providing that? I think that's what we need to be doing. I think we need to be exposing kids to and equipping them with the skills necessary that they will need to take on. Not just take a class because that's the way it's always been done. That's the way we've always done it, right? So I think the relevancy piece is incredibly important. At Doral, we had a longevity research study on over 200 mice where kids are researching different antioxidants and taking that research, publishing that research, and owning that research. It's stuff that
Right.
they're creating, which leads me to my next point, which is I think we need to create agency in them. And that's them doing, that's them, grappling problems that they want to solve hands on and not just, being seated waiting to be told what to do.
Hmm.
I think students today, the great students, the good students, are the ones that sit down and wait to be told what to do. And that's because our education system was built 100 years ago, and it was built to create factory workers and obedient employees. And today, what I think the world needs is critical thinkers and folks that can do things.
Steve, how does that balance with the absenteeism problem, for example, that you're describing? Do you see do you see a direct connection to when you aim to make education relevant for students and ground it in things that might prove more interesting? Does that have a ready impact on students actually coming to class and the level of engagement that you're seeing in students that aren't the perhaps as self-motivated ones that are, that are either driving themselves or being driven by parents, whatever it is?
Yeah, when there's no question when kids are owning their projects, When kids are owning their work, they wake up in the morning with purpose to come to school. They're going to be there. They're not going to want to miss. I always tell teachers when I travel around the country that we in education need to stop thinking we're the gatekeepers of information. Back in the old days, you had to go to school, you had to go to university because that's where the books were. The information was there.
Yes.
Today, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So if you're gatekeeping that, what are you providing? Right? So what we should be doing is what are the experiences that we're tailoring to these students that they could not get anywhere else,
Hmm.
right? When we created the innovation lab at Doral Academy, we spent close to $2 million on all the equipment, on the space, on the design. If you walk in there, it looks like you're walking into an office at Google. The types of computers and laptops and virtual reality glasses. I mean, you can't just experience that anywhere. A
Hmm.
homeschool student cannot have access to that. So it's important, and I think this is the leverage that your traditional schools have, is when they can create these experiences. I mean, we have world class. I mean, the same equipment that you see at the television, ABC, NBC News, like these are the same equipment that these kids are using in these programs,
Wow.
so that when they enter the field, they would have
They
already
know
done it.
exactly what they're doing. Interesting.
Those are the types of experiences that we need to tailor for our kids that they can tackle and use and have access to.
Absolutely. Steve, how do you, and I'm asking for your perspective here. I don't expect you to have sort of the overarching answer for it, but you've just pointed out that creating the innovation lab, for lack of better terms, at your school was a $2 million undertaking. I have a couple of questions in there. One, sort of, how did you get the buy-in to lead to that kind of budget for that experience? And then how do you create similar opportunities and experiences for students at schools that don't have that kind of budget or capacity to create a $2 million workspace that rivals ABC networks, for example?
It's a great question. I think for us at Doral, there was a perfect storm. Number one, we had 4,200 students in the school, so you're running a hefty budget. Number two,
Yeah.
during COVID, you had a lot of ESSER funding, and a lot of that funding that educational institutions were given to adapt, to upgrade their campuses with the technology needed, right? And so pretty much anything in technology and technology programs and the future of STEM was pretty much open for. We had a free for all, in the sense of,
Got it.
we were able to think 5 years down the road and build spaces, buy equipment for things that we were going to do ahead. The other thing I think that is important is, as a leader, one of the biggest problems I think we have in education is you have these unbelievable educators on this side. They know how to run a school. They know how to educate kids. They know how to equip and staff teachers with what they need. They don't understand tech. And then
Hmm.
on the other side, you have all these wonderful educational vendors and ed tech companies that are building unbelievable products, but they really don't understand the classroom. And so I think there needs to be a bridge. Just think about what an educator has had to become in the last 5 years.
Hmm.
A Secret Service agent, sanitation
Jeez.
specialist, mental health expert, and the list goes on and on and on. Every year they keep adding things to our plate that, by the way, has nothing to do with what we went to school for.
Right. Yeah. You weren't trained for that.
And now you're adding AI and you're adding, all
Yeah.
these technologies. The leader has to shift that mindset, and have what we're calling now the AI mindset. AI is disrupting how we function, not only in the future of work, but how we're going to function in society.
Hmm.
There needs to be a mindset shift. Well, I'm actually working with a colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Connor. We're creating the AI Mindset Institute, where we're helping leaders make that connection between technology and leadership in schools, what that technology can do, but more foundationally, the mindset shifts needed to be ready for the future.
Can you talk to me more about the AI Mindset Institute? What kinds of things are you pursuing, and how are you encouraging teachers to enable AI in the classroom in ways that they don't feel undermine the work that they're doing as teachers by giving students the answers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to FETC, which is the Future of Education Technology Conference. It's one of the largest ed tech conferences in the country. And so I'm walking through the vendor aisles, and there's over 500 ed tech vendors there at the Orange County National Convention Center. And I put on my administrator hat and I'm walking through, and I start noticing Every ed tech is touting a new AI product, or they're just an AI company, right? At the beginning of the whole thing, you had states started to ban AI, and then we started hearing terms like personalized learning, adaptive learning. All these things started coming into the environment, all these terms, and now you see, schools and districts doing AI PDs in their with their teachers, and they're teaching, this is how I use ChatGPT, and I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do this. And I think we're doing it backwards. I think we need to establish these mindset shifts. We need to establish a set of pillars and frameworks, and a kind of like a filter that we can help leaders in making these decisions on how they're going to use AI. What's the purpose behind AI? And then how am I going to equip and train our staff to use it? That's the only way it's going to work. And so that's what the AI Mindset Institute does, is equips leaders with number one, the mindset shifts that need to happen. Just like we developed the growth mindset, how do we develop an AI mindset?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like these big pillars and frameworks that they can work off of on and start adopting AI into the educational system. I don't think AI should be a class. I don't think it should be like this, like the ultimate tool. I think it should be eventually something that's working seamlessly in the background to augment us as leaders, as teachers, and as students.
Absolutely. It's interesting, Steve. A lot of what you're pointing out certainly mimics what we see in business today. But I think in business, there is an openness or even an excitement around how can we leverage AI to accomplish things faster, amongst all the other things that it can do for us. I envision that the old way of viewing education would be AI is cheating, if you will. It can write your paper for you. It can do your research for you. But what you're pointing out is really the end state future of, well, what happens when we get beyond the fear of AI doing the work for our students and start looking at how AI enables our students to do things better, faster, to learn more, etc. Where do you sort of see the balance in that, and how is that coming to life today versus where you think it might head in the future?
Danny, that's an unbelievable question. And I think, typically in education and maybe out in the workforce as well, whenever there's a new technology, we always kind of get that technology and plug it into our current
Yeah.
frameworks and SOPs when this technology has the potential to disrupt and recreate the entire model.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, that's the way we've been kind of just sprinkling it in for teacher to help teachers save time in lesson plans and help teachers grade faster and do reports better. Ultimately, I think at the end of the day, we got to look at the purpose and what it is that we're trying to accomplish with education.
Mm-hmm.
And if our purpose continues to be the same, which right now what it does is it measures the best students by what they can regurgitate.
Yes.
Computers already do that faster than us.
Right.
And so is that setting up for success in the future? No, it's not. And what we have to do is adopt our models to perform so that students are thinking critically. How can we embed AI now to get kids to think critically, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can we embed AI to get kids to think computationally? I think a term now we're going to start seeing across all of education is computational science. Like
Hmm.
we cannot get away from the data, the statistical models. It's going to have to be integrated across every domain, especially in the workforce. I mean, you have AI that's integrating and converging across every single industry. Why would
Right.
education think it's different?
Right. Right. It's interesting, Steve, as you're describing it, I'm sort of envisioning kind of three key areas. You've talked a lot about how teachers leverage AI and how it might impact their processes and workflows and how they go about teaching. And obviously, there's the question of how students might leverage AI and what the impact is on how they go about learning. But the other thing that you're hinting at that's really interesting is sort of the AI layer in terms of enabling better education. And rightly or wrongly, the thing that's popped into my head is, a camera that sits in every classroom that starts to recognize when a student's attention is veering off, for example, and giving feedback to the teacher that, hey, Danny was sitting in the back row and was flipping through a comic book, or whatever, or staring at his phone. I'm
By the
dating
way,
myself here.
that
What's that?
exists already. That
Interesting.
exists already.
Okay. Interesting.
There's platforms out there that let teachers know when a student's focused or when he's not focused.
Interesting. I'm curious how you envision all of those sort of three areas coming together. Like, what you're really starting to hint at is, what does school look like tomorrow that is different from today, that keeps safety in mind, that obviously puts education for every individual student at the forefront, that, understands that individual student's learning path and sort of adjusts along the way. If you had to sort of paint the picture of the, I don't know, sci-fi or the science-driven, perhaps not fictional school of the future, what do you think that starts to look like in like 2, 5, 10 years?
That's a great question. And I think right now you're at a race for that in the space.
Mm-hmm.
Right now you have so many innovational models that they're really challenging the system.
Mm-hmm.
Right now is the time where everybody's gathering the research towards, no, my model's better than yours and this is better than that.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think there's a one size fits all model. I think parents need to get ultra educated on what's best for their son or daughter.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. What I see in the future is, and I'll steal this from Kai-Fu Lee's book, 2041, where every student has an AI, and that AI is being programmed to know what that kid's strengths and weaknesses are, how to build up upon both. The parents have major influence in the kind of upbringing that this AI companion will provide for them. One of the things that we cannot forget is the student still needs that growth. The student still needs that struggle in learning, for learning to happen, right? If you're not a coder, right, and you ask ChatGPT to build an app for you,
Mm-hmm.
and it starts spitting out code, unless you know what you're talking about, unless you know how to program, whatever code it gives you, you got to
Might as
live
well be
with.
another language, or is another language.
Right? You don't know if that's good or if that's bad. That the growth of becoming that programmer is the whole point of the process, right?
Mm-hmm.
With AI available, you can now skip that process. And we
Yes.
cannot afford to do that. Like, I get so upset when I hear the major CEOs talk about that AI is going to, replace computer science majors and we don't need any more programmers. I'd argue, I think we need more programmers than before.
Your reaction, Steve, makes a lot of sense in a world where AI is still nascent and, where it's making mistakes when it's writing the code for you, for example. We can envision a world, though, where every time that AI spits out a block of code to do a thing that you asked it to do, that it knows enough that it's correct. In a world where what you're describing is true, do you need kids that understand the code that's being written by the AI, for example? Or do you need kids that are challenging the AI to ask the questions that it wouldn't know to ask itself?
Is it important for a kid to know the language? No. But it's important for a kid to understand how computers operate. And
Okay.
so I think the language, whether it's C++ or it's Python or all that, becomes irrelevant, but
Yes.
we still need to know the computer science part, the logic part of how computers operate and how these models are actually creating outputs.
Got it. Okay. That's completely fair. And I totally see where you're coming.
But at the end of the day, the reason I say I think we need more is because the computer scientist that knows how to program and asks ChatGPT to create an app, and it
Uh-huh.
spits out code, he knows that code is great. So now he's been augmented as a super developer,
Yeah.
because now what would take him 60 days to do, he just did it in 60 seconds,
Right.
right? So he can work on 20 projects at the same time.
So you're viewing the software engineer as architect as opposed to executional hands.
Yeah, it's actually one of the kind of the frameworks is that we need to teach kids and teach teachers, leaders how to become directors. And you can't become a director until you know exactly what you're looking for. And that
Yeah.
goes to asking the right questions, asking the right prompts.
It really just comes back then to the critical thinking aspect that you've pushed so hard on around. At the end of the day, if you know how to ask the right questions and connect the dots in ways that a computer isn't going to think of, then that's really where the value comes from.
Absolutely. And by the way, I believe that in the future, and I'm talking maybe 10, 15 years, who knows, right? But I actually think of, everything's going to become so automated
Mm-hmm.
that we are, as humans, are going to crave the most humanistic things that we have.
Yes.
And so I think it goes back, the pendulum kind of shifts back to, the most important things in life are communication, empathy, all the soft skills. And I think that becomes our value prop as humans. And that's what makes us the most valuable.
Steve, I want to circle back to something that you brought up during our intro call as well. And I think it's sort of an extension of what we're talking about here. You said very pointedly that you believe that the 4-year degree is dead and that the future of college education looks like an ongoing subscription service where we just continually better ourselves. Talk to me more about that. I think that's a really interesting perspective around the shift in education. And when you align that to a world where, automation is the default and soft skills are important and critical thinking guides all, then what you have described in terms of continuing education and, higher level academics becomes really interesting, and it becomes centered around lifelong learning.
When we were growing up, everybody asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up. What do you want to be when you grow up,
Mm-hmm.
Danny? And I think we need to flip that question and start asking kids, what problem do you want to solve?
Ooh, I
And
like
so I
that.
think we're going to go from problem to problem throughout our lifetimes. And
Uh-huh.
we're going to have to reinvent and revamp ourselves every 5 to 6 years. So we can't confuse education for learning. I think there needs to be a revamp of kind of what this credentialed path looks like. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lifelong learning model is definitely going to be needed, whether that's with the universities or that's something online. But as technology continues to advance, we're going to have to continue to revamp and relearn. And so I actually think the most important skill a kid should acquire in the K through 12 is how to learn. At
Yeah,
some point, I think we have to start looking at, is the what more important or the how? Because you will have to continue to learn just to be relevant in today's society. The
sure.
years of you go to college for 4 years, you're done, and that's it. You go to work for one job for the rest of your life. I mean, that's been long gone.
Steve, this has been really fascinating to learn about your perspective on innovation and education. I really appreciate your sharing. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you're dying to share?
Most people think innovation is you have to come up with something totally new.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't disagree with that anymore. Innovation is taking something from here, and from here. Totally different industries, totally different sectors, and putting it together. Like I'm just copy pasting what's happening in the real world and bringing it
Mm-hmm.
down to their level. It's that easy. You just got to be willing to try it, to try new things, and if it fails, it fails, and just find another way. And so I think sometimes we get inundated and we kind of get intimidated with innovation and trying new things, and it's really not that hard.
Yeah, we do make too big of a deal out of it sometimes, don't we? Awesome. Well, as I said, Steve, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to reach out and pick your brain, share ideas about innovation in the education space, where's the best place to get in touch with you?
So you can follow me on X, Stevo2113, or you can get me on LinkedIn, just Steven Iglesias on LinkedIn. And you can check out our website if you're interested. It's the AI Mindset Institute,
Awesome.
AIMindsetinstitute.com.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Danny, thank you. It was an unbelievable conversation.
That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. Join us again for our next episode, and don't forget to subscribe at innovatedisruptordie.com. That's all, folks.